In the novel Middlesex, the main character, Cal Stefanidis, laments the inability of language to capture his deepest experiences. He yearns for something more adequate, saying, "I'd like to have at my disposal complicated hybrid emotions, Germanic train car constructions like, say, the happiness that attends disaster, or the disappointment of sleeping with one's fantasy. I'd like to show how intimations of mortality brought on by aging family members connects with the hatred of mirrors that begins in middle age. I'd like to have a word for the sadness inspired by failing restaurants, as well as for the excitement of getting a room with a minibar." He continues, "I've never had the right words to describe my life, and now that I've entered my story, I need them more than ever. I can't just sit back and watch from a distance anymore." I sympathize with Cal's experience of inadequacy in the face of describing my own deepest experiences. I have felt that sometimes language fails at just the moment I need it to hold the fullness of what I am trying to say. This is true for the brighter feelings, such as happiness and joy, certainly. But this unsayability, this break in language, is even more pronounced with the darker emotions, I think. Julia Kristeva, in her work of psychoanalytic literary criticism, Black Sun, describes depression as a failure or lacuna of words, the place where language ends and we encounter the unsayable. It's an unfortunate time for this break in meaning to occur because this is exactly where we need language the most, in those times when we are bereft and alone in what we have felt, when pain consumes us and holds us at its heart. We need to be able to speak those experiences into being so that we can begin to approach them, begin to work with them. But these are precisely the moments that often remain the most incommunicable. Now, the spread of literacy during the Enlightenment coincided with the rise of analytic languages of psychology and sociology, and these became authoritative for how human beings began to explain themselves and their world. But before that, before the Enlightenment, story and myth were dominant ways that human beings expressed themselves. And I wonder if something wasn't lost in the transition. Rollo May once said that myth might be just such a language that is able to reflect ourselves back to ourselves. Myths, he writes, are narrative patterns that give significance to our existence. In other words, sacred stories are a language that captures something deep and true about the human experience. They arrive sometimes when our usual modes of speaking fail us, perhaps especially when we touch upon difficult or tragic points of our existence. Easter, a familiar story, a story that we tell every year. Now, some have a complicated theological overlay to this story, a supernatural veneer, but I'm not interested in that veneer today. Instead, I'm interested in what's beneath it. I believe that there's something profound beneath it, something of a language, a grammar that is etched from the syllables of death despair, and new life. Today, with those syllables, I am going to try to write a piece of my own life. It begins in the dark before the morning has arrived. While it was still dark, I awake to an empty bed. From fragmented dreams of what I had lost to the realities of this silent room, I awake. A street light pricks through the top of the wine-dark curtains, staining the uppermost part of my white apartment walls. My sheets are tangled around my legs, a restless sleep. And then I hear again that terrible silence. No gentle breathing or snoring, just nothing. For nearly 7 years, I had the same person wake up next to me with the same sounds every day. Jason, my husband. Not a day had passed when we were completely apart, when we did not speak to each other at some point, when we did not hear each other's breathing. But now I wake up alone, and that aloneness covers me like a heavy blanket, or perhaps like a stone that is so heavy that I have no idea how I will manage to get out of this bed. 5 days before, Jason had fallen on some wet pavement and hit the back of his head on a curb. I have expectations that he will come home after the first day in the hospital, but things fall apart. Things get worse, and before I know it, the hospital staff is performing heroic surgeries on him. Just this one more will do it, they say. It will bring him back. It doesn't. And then the doctor sits down with me and tells me, Jason is not going to come back. I awake with this stone on top of me, trying to ready myself to go back to the hospital where Jason's body is lying, where machines are performing every function for him. I'm trying to get out of this bed in order to go to the hospital to tell him goodbye for a final time. I have no words. Hans Holbein was a 16th century German painter who created a piece called The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb. It did something that was unique at the time, unique to the history of art, actually. It was to depict the corpse of Jesus inside of the burial chamber. It showed the time before the resurrection, before the stone had been rolled away. Holbein believed that he was honoring an image, a part of the sacred story that others had overlooked. But many in the church declared the painting sacrilege, blasphemous. They could tolerate a living, suffering Christ on the cross and a risen Christ outside of the tomb, but they could not conceive of a dead Christ, of the vacant body of Christ. As one churchman put it upon viewing the painting, some may see this and lose their faith. The Holbein painting depicts a story at its darkest turn. After life is gone, after hope flees, after joy is snuffed out, we are left with the darkness of the tomb, the heaviness of the stone that covers our life, hope, and joy that communicates their death. The church objected to the painting because it was too unsettling to see that in the context of the gospel story. But why? I wonder if perhaps the discomfort was that the painting etched a painful, though perhaps all too familiar grammar of the human experience. It's an image that isn't blasphemous because it's unrelatable to us as human beings. Rather, it wounds us precisely because we have experienced its truth at some point in our lives. The grief, the heartache, the despair. It shows a moment of utter brokenness. It lifts a veil on the pain of our most shattered moments. Yes, here it is, mirrored back to us in image, the time when hope has abandoned us, the moment of despair, the language of grief before the stone has been rolled away. But if the church objected to it, it's not because the words were not in the gospel itself. Oh, they were. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. Adam Jagajewski, in his poem Try to Praise a Mutilated World, writes of the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homestead of exiles. He writes of the executioner's song and the boat of refugees that is headed to nowhere. He cobbles together these metaphors that speak to loss, to destruction, to tragedy, to mutilated parts of our lives and our world. Those times when the things that we love or care for most are left in the dirt, overgrown by weeds. When the things that we cherish, that are most important to us, that give us hope, are so quickly dead and buried. With poetry, he shows that angle, that hopelessness, that grief that yearns to speak and yet is too difficult to fully comprehend. And so we just get in his writings image fragments. Perhaps that's all we can muster from that. Word pictures of a broken world. This is, I'm pretty sure, where Mary Magdalene, walking to the tomb to find the body of her beloved teacher, is at. Oh, the terrible fragment that must arrive again and again into her mind, into her consciousness, the body in the tomb, too difficult to hold, to speak. On the first day, before the sun has risen, she walks to the tomb. Yes, hope has been wrenched from her hands. Love has been wrenched from her world. She walks in the dark to the tomb where these are buried beneath a heavy stone. It may or may not be exactly a true story, this telling, but it is exactly a true language. The stone seems heavier and more real each time that I touch it. The grief has settled inside of me like an unmovable weight. I approach it in the afternoon, in the evening, in the late night, each time painful, incommunicable. A story that I wish to speak but can't. Its insides are too cold, too dead. Most often I reach for that stone in the dark hours of the morning, the empty place where my husband used to lay. I push this rock that I know won't move, that I think will always be there, to have a despair that is that deep, that certain, to begin to know that at some profound level it is simply not going to change, that the world is going to remain a mutilated one. It's in that context that I awake one morning, reaching over for this rock that had become so present to me in those pre-dawn hours. I breathe in and reach for it, knowing I will find its oppressive singularity, and yet something is wrong. Something inside me stirs. It changes. I try to breathe, but something is missing. Mary Magdalene tries to breathe in the dark hours of the morning. Something is missing. This is the place, right? Of course it is. This is the place where she buried the one that she loved the most. This is the place where she buried her hope, the source of her joy, her love. This is where her dreams were extinguished. This is the place. It has to be, and yet something is missing. The stone. The stone has been rolled away. I don't know when or how it happened. I can't remember whether it was sudden or whether it took a long time and I just didn't notice it. But the stone has been rolled away. The monument to my grief, the thing that I used to think about constantly, is just not there anymore. I search for it. I feel for it. But the stone is gone. It has been rolled away. And in its place, there is this emptiness, this newness, this sense, this hint, this possibility that life might return. I don't know exactly what it is. It's new. Perhaps it's the possibility of resurrection, even from the darkest, most mutilated moments. Resurrection, new life, the final syllable of a grammar given to me like a gift. At divinity school, a friend once said to me that she didn't like the story of Holy Week leading up to Easter because so much of it is dark, so much suffering to get to hope. I've come to appreciate her position, learning that the story of the ark from Good Friday to Holy Saturday and finally to Easter may not resonate for every person, and that is okay. But for me, it was different. That first year, when I was needing a language for something so unbelievably painful that words crumbled at my touch, I found solace in the liturgy of Good Friday. When I needed an image for how alone and bereft I felt in the world, it was the image of a body in a tomb. And most of all, how could I explain that moment, that time when all of it changed, when the truly miraculous happened and I felt a renewed sense of life and hope where a heavy stone had been before. That was how Easter greeted me. Life and hope had been buried and destroyed. They had been placed in the dirt, covered over by weeds. My world was a mutilated world, and then miraculously, seemingly out of nowhere, I reach for the stone, absolutely certain that it is going to greet me back with all of its oppressive weight, and for some unbelievable reason, it is gone, rolled away when I least expect it. Oh, you, grammar of Easter, sing your song of hope that comes after loss, life that comes after grief, mourning that comes after night, praise that comes even in the midst of a mutilated world. Sing to us because you hold a truth that is contained in the very DNA of the human experience. Your syllables, your grammar. I know what they are trying to say. I've spoken that language myself. There is in the Psalms a line that I will end with this morning, perhaps something like a postscript to my sermon today. They go like this: weeping may endure through the night, but remember, joy comes in the morning. Joy has come. We can celebrate. We can even praise. I am just so grateful to share this day with all of you. Amen. I love you, and blessed be.